Joining us now to discuss in a CNBC exclusive interview, longtime China bear Kyle Bass, who's founder and chief investment officer at Heyman Capital Management. Very good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, Wilfred. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Very well. And let's talk about the trade talks restarting. How optimistic are you that a deal is reached, let's say, this side of the new year?
Yeah, at first, you referred to me as a longtime China bear. I like to call myself a China realist. But I would like to, when you look at what the Chinese did in the last negotiation, it was about a 150-page agreement. And the night before both sides were to sign the agreement, the Chinese took 50 pages, the core of the agreement, and threw it away. And so they won't sign anything that's either measurable or enforceable. And Trade Rep Lighthizer is pushing something that is both measurable and enforceable, because every deal the Chinese have signed with us since their ascension into the WTO in 2001, China never lives up to their promises. So at some point in time, one of our administrative officials has got to hold their feet to the fire. And this is kind of the battle of cultures, because the Communist Party doesn't want to submit themselves to anything that's measurable or enforceable. I don't think an agreement can be had.
But Carl, how much is the trade issues a swing factor in your bear case, or your realist case, as you like to put it, on China? Would you be bearish either way, and would you be incrementally bearish if things broke down?
No, I think it's important to focus on a couple of things with trade. So first of all, trade is so nominal, it's so minimal when you look at our relationship with China. It's really IP theft. It's the stealing, the lying, the cheating, the thievery of all of the U.S.'s, let's say, what we produce best here in the U.S. is our innovation and our intellectual property. And they seem to take it at will. And so I think it's important that trade, look, if we're talking about $500 billion worth of trade and potentially putting 25% tariffs on it, we're talking about a little over $100 billion. The Chinese economy is $13 trillion. The U.S. economy is $20 trillion. And we dedicate so much time to it, it's really nothing. What's important here is restructuring our relationship with China. You heard FBI Director Wray say a couple of days ago that there are 1,000 intellectual property theft cases actively being pursued by the FDI, and all of them find their way back to China. So we have to stop allowing China from stealing from us. And I think it's important that these trade negotiations are but an agreement that we are forcing them to reset their entire relationship with us.
You think it's going to work?
I mean, clearly, I don't think it's going to work. I know Mnuchin and his cadre are pro-China and maybe pro-China even after he comes out of the Treasury. And I think that Lighthizer is more of a realist and looking at the national security of our country.
How are you expressing this view right now, Kyle? Because I believe you sold out of the Chinese currency short ahead of the sort of trade tensions last year. So what exactly are you doing to bet against China?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, Sarah. I think I've spent the better part of a decade studying China, and the more and more I study all of the different aspects of our relationship and the manner in which the Communist Party operates, it has become more of a personal passion of mine. And I don't want to be conflicted with, let's say, financial incentives at this point in time. So we covered our Chinese positions. We have positions in the rest of Southeast Asia, but nothing directly in China, because I think it's the epicenter of U.S. national security. And I think the greatest risk to our security is China over the next 10, 20 years, and we better pay a lot of attention to it right now. So there's no trade expression here. It's just, Sarah, when you think about the fiduciary responsibility of institutional investors in the U.S., how can you invest in a market where there is no rule of law? How can you buy a company that doesn't adhere to the same auditing standards as U.S. companies? How can you, as a fiduciary, own a variable interest entity in Alibaba when all you own is a small piece of paper that references something out of the Cayman Islands? Like, if you lose money there, you should be sued by whoever you're a fiduciary for, and you're going to lose that suit. And so I don't understand how fiduciaries can buy these things.
It's interesting to hear your answer there about how you're not in the trade because of the conflict, because, as you know, there was this ProPublica story out this week, which did name you, and it details RNC co-chair Tommy Hicks Jr.'s relationship with Donald Trump Jr. The report says that Hicks arranged a meeting between you and the Treasury Department to discuss your views on China. It says it's not clear whether Hicks held investments in any of your China-related funds at the time, and that the relationship hadn't been probed by ethics officers. I know you talked to our Kayla Tausche about the piece, said it was a hit piece. Just wanted to give you an opportunity here to clarify what your role is with the administration, with the Treasury, and whether there was any conflict there.
I think it's absurd. The Treasury reaches out to people in the professional community every single day. I lecture on the Chinese financial system at Stanford and Harvard and Cal Berkeley, and they reached out to me asking me about the Chinese financial system. This was a piece that a political reporter spent many months trying to do something with the RNC chairman, and they FOIA'd all the meetings in Treasury and found one. It's really it's a joke.
You are nonetheless bearish still on other trades related to China. I think I'm right in saying, Carl. Are you increasingly bearish on Hong Kong given the protests of late?
Yeah, I mean, look. When you I look at leverage. So if you look at my history, at what I've done, I found the over-levered portions of the U.S. housing market, and that's how we began our firm's history. And then we found the excessive leverage in Ireland and Iceland and Greece in Europe. Then we moved to Japan, and then we looked into China and Hong Kong. So there isn't any particularly regional bias here. There's a bias towards over-levered economies. And when you look at China or you look at Hong Kong's the most levered developed economy in the world. They have 900% of GDP in banking assets. That's exactly what happened to Iceland, Ireland, and Greece when they fell. And you also have 300% private sector credit to GDP. For example, in the U.S. and Japan, we only have 150%. So Hong Kong is the most levered, developed country in the world, and now they're having this situation where there's an existential crisis. Like, imagine if you were running a business in Hong Kong. Would you be investing more money in CapEx? Would you be buying more homes? Would you like to move more of your family into or out of Hong Kong at this moment in time? You know, Hong Kong's going to have a real problem over the next few years, and I think you're going to see Hong Kong be the epicenter of the relationship between the U.S. and China.